Rebecca Morgan stared at the empty road stretching before her, the stagecoach, nothing but a distant cloud of dust, disappearing into the horizon. The 26-year-old schoolteacher's legs trembled beneath her as the terrible truth sank in. They'd discovered who she was. The autumn wind howled across the Dakota Territory, whipping her auburn hair across her tear-streaked face. She was alone, completely alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca clutched the small leather satchel, containing everything she owned in the world. 3 years of running, 3 years of building new identities in small frontier towns, all undone by a single wanted poster. The crude drawing barely resembled her, but the description was unmistakable. Rebecca Morgan, 26, auburn hair, green eyes, wanted for theft of $5,000 from the First National Bank of St. Louis. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd never stolen a penny in her life. But when you're the only witness to your employer's embezzlement scheme, it's remarkably easy to become the scapegoat, especially when that employer is Judge William Blackwood, the most powerful man in St. Louis. "Can't have criminals teaching our children," Mayor Thompson had declared that morning, his face a mask of righteous indignation that didn't quite hide his fear of the bounty hunters who'd arrived in town asking questions. The stage leaves at noon. Best you be on it. No trial, no chance to explain. Just another hasty departure from yet another life she'd carefully constructed, but this time was different. The bounty hunters had been waiting at the last stop. She'd glimpsed them from the stagecoach window, scanning the passengers. She'd slipped away during the confusion of a wheel repair, ducking into the tall prairie grass when the driver wasn't looking. Better to take her chances alone in the wilderness than face Judge Blackwood's version of justice. The stagecoach had continued on without her, the driver either not noticing or not caring about one less passenger. The late September sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie. Rebecca surveyed her surroundings, trying to quell the panic rising in her chest. To the east, the trail continued toward the next settlement, at least 2 days' journey by foot. To the west, a line of cottonwood trees marked what must be a creek. To the north, the land rose in gentle hills toward distant bluffs, and to the south, a plume of smoke rose from what might be a small homestead, water first, then shelter. The basics of survival hadn't changed just because her world had shattered. 1 foot in front of the other, one breath after another. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden as she trudged toward the creek. 26 years old and cast aside again. She defied her wealthy Philadelphia family to become a teacher, endured their cutting disapproval when she'd chosen to head west after the scandal. "You'll die of dysentery or an Indian arrow," her father had warned with cruel satisfaction. Now it seemed he would be partially right, though not in the way he'd imagined. The sky darkened rapidly as clouds gathered overhead. Rebecca quickened her pace, the threat of rain adding urgency to her already desperate situation. She needed shelter before nightfall, before the temperature dropped. Her teacher's dress and light jacket were hardly suited for sleeping rough. On the open prairie, the creek, when she reached it, was swollen from recent rains, its banks muddy and treacherous. She knelt carefully at the edge, cupping the cool water in her hands and drinking deeply. The simple act of quenching her thirst steadied her nerves somewhat, allowing her to think more clearly. A fallen log nearby offered a moment's rest. Rebecca sat, opening her satchel to take inventory of her meager possessions. A spare dress, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small knife, a tin cup, the book of poetry her mother had given her before their estrangement, $63 sewn into the lining of the satchel, and her teaching credentials, forged but convincing enough to secure positions in frontier towns desperate for educated women. not nearly enough to survive a Dakota winter. The first heavy raindrops began to fall. As Rebecca repacked her satchel, she needed to find shelter, and quickly. Following the creek seemed her best option. There might be a hollow in the bank, an overhanging tree, anything to keep the worst of the elements at bay. The rain intensified, soaking through her clothes. In minutes, lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Rebecca flinched, then pushed forward, following the creek's winding path. The water level was rising visibly now, the current growing stronger. If the rain continued like this, the banks might flood by morning. Through the curtain of rain, Rebecca spotted a dark shape ahead, larger than a boulder, oddly angular. Drawing closer, she realized it was a trapper's cabin, long abandoned by the look of its sagging door and moss-covered roof. Still, it offered 4 walls and a reprieve from the downpour. The door hung askew on a single rusted hinge. Rebecca pushed it open cautiously, half expecting to find a bear or mountain lion sheltering inside. Instead, she found only dust, cobwebs, and the remnants of a stone fireplace. The roof leaked in several places, but a corner near the fireplace remained relatively dry. Rebecca sank to the floor, her soaked skirts pooling around her. The cold seeped into her bones, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. She wouldn't survive the night like this, not without fire or dry clothes. With trembling hands, she gathered what looked like the remains of a wooden chair, breaking it into pieces for kindling. Her teaching in the Dakota Territory had included practical skills. Frontier schools often doubled as community centers, and teachers were expected to maintain them. Building fires was a basic necessity when winter temperatures plummeted below zero. From her satchel, she withdrew the small knife and the book of poetry, hesitating over the latter. It was her last connection to her former life, to the mother who had loved her despite her father's disapproval. With a pang of regret, she carefully tore out the blank pages at the front and back, leaving the poems intact. The paper would make excellent tinder if she could just get a spark. Rebecca had no matches, a critical oversight she now deeply regretted. The flint and steel method she'd seen trappers use required tools she didn't possess. Still, she'd heard that a knife blade struck against certain types of stone could create sparks. She searched the cabin's interior, eventually finding a quartz-like rock near the fireplace. It took nearly an hour of frustrated attempts. Her hands, growing raw and bloody from the effort, before a tiny spark finally caught the paper. Rebecca bent close, gently blowing on the ember, coaxing it to life. The tiny flame grew, catching the smallest wood splinters she'd prepared. Rebecca added larger pieces gradually, relief washing over her as the fire established itself. She stripped off her sodden outer garments, arranging them near the flames to dry while preserving her modesty, with the spare dress from her satchel. As warmth slowly returned to her limbs, Rebecca's mind turned to her predicament. The bounty hunters wouldn't give up easily, not with $5,000 at stake. They'd realize she'd left the stagecoach eventually, and when they did, they'd double back, searching every inch of the trail. How long before they found this cabin? A day? 2 at most. She needed to keep moving, to find somewhere truly safe, if such a place existed for a woman with her name on a wanted poster. Perhaps if she could reach the Dakota Badlands, lose herself in that maze of canyons and buttes. But she'd need supplies, guidance. She'd never survive alone. As darkness filled the cabin, broken only by the flickering firelight, Rebecca huddled closer to the flames. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Wind howled through cracks in the walls, carrying the distant sound of wolves calling to one another across the prairie. "I won't die here," she whispered, fiercely to herself. "I won't give up like this." Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now, and lightning split the sky. In that brief, brilliant illumination, Rebecca saw it, a human silhouette in the doorway, tall and imposing against the night. Her scream caught in her throat as a deep voice spoke, calm yet commanding. "This is no place for a woman alone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca froze. The knife she'd been using clutched tightly in her trembling hand. The silhouette stepped into the cabin, water streaming from a deerskin jacket. In the firelight, she could make out strong features, copper, skin, and long black hair tied back with a leather cord. "The creek rises quickly in storms," the man said in perfect, though accented English. "By morning, this cabin will be underwater." Rebecca gripped the knife tighter, her back pressing against the rough cabin wall. "Stay back," she warned, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man made no move toward her. Instead, he knelt by the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I am not here to harm you," he said. "I am White Elk of the Lakota. I saw your fire from the ridge." He nodded toward her makeshift campfire. "Smoke from wet wood travels far." Rebecca's mind raced. The frontier newspapers regularly published lurid accounts of Indian attacks, but her 3 years teaching in Dakota Territory had taught her that such stories were often exaggerated to justify government actions against native peoples. Still, she was alone, vulnerable, and this man, Lakota or not, was a stranger. "What do you want?" she asked, knife still raised. "Nothing," White Elk replied. "But if you stay here, the water will claim you. The hunting cabin floods every heavy rain." He gestured outside, where the downpour continued unabated. "I have a shelter, dry, on higher ground." Rebecca hesitated. The offer of dry shelter was tempting, but years of caution had taught her to mistrust unexpected kindness. "Why help me? You don't know me." Something flickered across White Elk's expression, perhaps surprise at her directness, perhaps respect. "My people do not leave travelers to the mercy of storms," he said simply. "Even white travelers." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's remaining shutter. Outside, the sound of rushing water grew louder. Rebecca glanced down, noticing for the first time a thin sheen of water creeping across the cabin floor. White Elk followed her gaze. "The decision is yours. Stay and hope the water stops rising, or come with me to safe ground." Rebecca weighed her options rapidly. The cabin was clearly flooding. If the man had meant her harm, he could have simply waited for the waters to drive her out, or attacked her already. And if the bounty hunters were following her trail, they'd certainly check an obvious shelter like this cabin. "I'll come with you," she said, lowering the knife but keeping it close. White Elk nodded, showing no reaction to her continued wariness. "Gather your things quickly. The path grows more dangerous with each passing minute." Rebecca hastily pulled her still damp dress back on, stuffed her spare clothing into her satchel, and wrapped the book of poetry in a scrap of relatively dry cloth. The fire hissed and died as water began pooling more rapidly around their feet. White Elk led the way. Outside, where the full force of the storm hit Rebecca like a physical blow. The rain felt like needles against her skin, the wind threatening to knock her off her feet. Worse still, the creek had risen dramatically, now lapping at the cabin's foundation. "Stay close," White Elk instructed, his voice raised to be heard. Over the storm, step where I step, he moved with surprising grace, given the treacherous conditions, picking a path along higher ground away from the rapidly flooding creek. Rebecca struggled to follow, her sodden skirts hampering her movement, her city-bred legs unused to traversing such terrain in darkness. When she stumbled for the third time, nearly falling headlong into what had become a muddy torrent, White Elk turned back. Without a word, he offered his hand. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before accepting it. His grip was strong, calloused, and startlingly warm despite the cold rain. They climbed steadily higher, leaving the floodplain behind. After what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than 30 minutes, they reached a natural overhang in the rocky bluffs. Beneath it, protected from the rain, was a small camp, a lean-to shelter of hides and branches, a stack of dry wood carefully covered, and the remains of a small fire. "Wait here," White Elk said, guiding her under the overhang. The simple shelter blocked the wind and rain completely, providing immediate relief from the elements. Rebecca sank down gratefully as White Elk rekindled the fire with practiced efficiency. The warm glow illuminated the small camp, revealing it to be neat and well-organized. Various tools hung from a rock projection, a bow and quiver of arrows, a knife similar to but larger than her own, and what appeared to be snares for small game. As the fire grew stronger, White Elk shrugged out of his wet deerskin jacket, revealing a simple buckskin shirt beneath. He hung the jacket on a branch to dry, then retrieved a bundle from within the lean-to. "Dry clothes," he said, offering the bundle to Rebecca. "My sister's. She visits from the reservation sometimes." Rebecca accepted the bundle hesitantly. It contained a simple dress of soft deerskin, nothing like the elaborate Indian costumes she'd seen in traveling shows back east. This was practical clothing, designed for the realities of prairie life. "I'll turn away," White Elk said, suiting action to words as he busied himself with something at the far edge of the overhang. Rebecca changed quickly, grateful for the dry garment despite its unfamiliarity. The deerskin dress was surprisingly comfortable, if somewhat shorter than her usual attire, revealing more of her ankles than propriety would normally allow. She laid her wet clothes near the fire to dry. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "Changing." White Elk turned back, nodding acknowledgement of her thanks. He offered her a strip of what appeared to be dried meat. "Eat," he suggested. "The journey has taken your strength." Rebecca's stomach growled in response. She realized she hadn't eaten since morning, before the mayor had delivered his ultimatum. She accepted the jerky, finding it tough but flavorful, rich with unfamiliar spices. As she ate, White Elk studied her with calm intensity. "You run from something," he said finally. Not a question, but a statement of observed fact. Rebecca tensed. "What makes you say that?" "Your eyes watch the trail even in darkness. Your hand stays near your knife. You choose a flooding cabin over the next town." He gestured to her satchel. "And you carry everything you own." His perception was unsettling. Rebecca considered lying, then discarded the notion. This man had possibly saved her life. Dishonesty seemed a poor repayment. "Yes," she admitted, "I'm running. There are men looking for me, white men with guns, and paper that says they can take me back to St. Louis." "Aha," White Elk nodded. "The bounty men. They passed through our hunting grounds 2 days ago. Asked many questions." Rebecca's heart sank. "They're ahead of me then, coming back this way probably." "Yes?" They wait at Yellow Creek Station, watching the trail. White Elk tilted his head, considering her. "What crime brings such men after a teacher?" Rebecca started in surprise. "How did you know I'm a teacher?" A hint of amusement flickered in White Elk's dark eyes. "Your hands," he said, gesturing, "clean, with ink stains, and you speak like one who explains things to children. Clear words, patient tone." Rebecca looked down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious. "I was, a teacher, and I committed no crime despite what those men claim." White Elk waited, neither pressing for details nor dismissing her assertion of innocence. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the rocky overhang. Outside, the storm continued its assault. But here, in this small pocket of warmth and unlikely safety, Rebecca felt her guard lowering fractionally. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "A powerful man stealing money, lots of money from people who trusted him. When he realized I knew, he claimed I was the thief. No one questioned his word against mine. He's a judge, respected. I ran before they could arrest me. And now you are hunted for another's crime," White Elk concluded. "This is a familiar story to my people. The simple statement of understanding, free from pity or disbelief, loosened something in Rebecca's chest. For 3 years, she'd carried her secret alone, never trusting anyone with the full truth. "What will you do when morning comes?" White Elk asked, adding another stick to the fire. Rebecca stared into the flames. "Keep running, I suppose, though I'm not sure where. The bounty hunters will check every settlement, every stagecoach." "The white man's reach is long," White Elk agreed, "but it is not without limits. There are places they do not go, trails they do not know." Rebecca looked up sharply. "Are you offering to help me?" White Elk regarded her thoughtfully. "Dawn will show the path forward," he said. "Sleep now. The storm passes soon, but your strength must return first." He moved to the entrance of their shelter, positioning himself where he could watch both the trail below and Rebecca herself. The message was clear. He would keep guard while she rested. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. The day's events, the hasty departure from town, the abandoned stagecoach, the flood, the rescue, caught up with her in a rush. Rebecca arranged her satchel as a pillow and lay down near the fire, the unfamiliar deerskin dress surprisingly comfortable against her skin. As she drifted towards sleep, a thought surfaced through her fatigue. For the first time in 3 years, someone else knew her secret. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't completely alone in her flight. Whether that would prove her salvation or her downfall, only morning would tell. Dawn arrived with tentative fingers of light, reaching beneath the rocky overhang. Rebecca woke suddenly, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings before the previous day's events rushed back. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed clean world glistening with moisture. White Elk was already awake, or perhaps he hadn't slept at all. He knelt at the edge of their shelter, using a small knife to whittle something from a piece of wood. When he sensed Rebecca watching, he turned. "The waters have receded," he said by way of greeting, "but they have taken the trapper's cabin with them." Rebecca rose, wincing as stiff muscles protested the night spent on hard ground. She moved carefully to the entrance of their shelter and looked out across the landscape. The creek that had threatened to drown her the night before had indeed retreated to its banks, but it had left destruction in its wake. The cabin where she'd sought refuge was now nothing more than broken timbers scattered along the creek bed. "I'd be dead if you hadn't found me," she acknowledged quietly. White Elk nodded, accepting her statement without false modesty. The storm. Spirits are not always kind to those who don't know their ways. Rebecca smoothed her borrowed deerskin dress, feeling acutely conscious of her appearance. Her hair had dried in wild tangles during the night, and she had no mirror to assess the damage. "My clothes? Are they dry?" "Yes, but the path ahead requires different garments." White Elk gestured toward her teacher's dress, now dry but still muddied and torn from yesterday's journey. "Your dress marks you as clearly as a shout. The bounty men will be watching for a woman dressed as you are." The practical truth of his observation was undeniable. Rebecca chewed her lower lip, considering. "I have nothing else except what I'm wearing now. My sister's clothes will serve until we reach safer ground. After that, you choose." White Elk returned to his whittling, giving her space to consider his words. Rebecca noted his use of "we," but didn't comment on it. Instead, she asked the more pressing question, "Where exactly is this safer ground?" White Elk looked up, meeting her gaze directly. 3 days' journey north, a place where my people gather when hunting, hidden from white men's maps." Rebecca hesitated, weighing her options. Traveling alone would almost certainly lead to capture. The bounty hunters knew these territories far better than she did. But following this stranger to a Lakota hunting camp? That presented its own risks. As if reading her thoughts, White Elk added, "You would not be the first white person to find shelter there. Some pass through, some stay longer." "And then what?" Rebecca pressed. I can't hide forever. Perhaps not forever, but long enough for the hunters to seek easier prey. White Elk set aside his carving, a small wooden animal taking shape beneath his skilled hands. The bounty men do not have endless patience, especially when their prey vanishes into Lakota territory. Rebecca considered this. 3 days' journey meant 3 days of not looking over her shoulder. 3 days without fear of immediate capture. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it might buy her time to formulate a better plan. All right, she decided, I'll go with you, but I'll need to know more about where we're going and who I'll meet there. A flicker of what might have been approval crossed White Elk's features. A wise request. We will talk as we walk. He rose in one fluid motion. But first, food. From a deerskin pouch, he produced pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, berries, and fat that Rebecca recognized from her time on the frontier. It wasn't what her Philadelphia upbringing would consider breakfast, but it was nourishing and portable. As they ate, White Elk explained the day's journey. They would follow game trails north, staying away from the main roads and settler paths. By nightfall, they should reach a series of bluffs that offered both shelter and a vantage point to spot anyone following. "But what about my clothes and things?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward her teacher's dress and boots. "We take them," White Elk said, "but hidden. The dress we can trade later for more suitable garments. The boots are good quality, worth keeping." Rebecca nodded, appreciating his practical approach. She repacked her satchel, making sure her money remained securely sewn into the lining. White Elk efficiently dismantled their camp, leaving barely a trace of their presence. "How do you know I won't slow you down?" Rebecca asked as they prepared to depart. The question had been nagging at her. She was reasonably fit for a school teacher, but hardly a wilderness expert. White Elk paused, considering her. "You survived 3 years on the frontier when your kind usually return east after one winter. You escaped the bounty men when others would have surrendered. You found shelter in a storm." His mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "You will keep up." The simple vote of confidence, delivered without flattery or condescension, bolstered Rebecca's resolve. She straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Lead on, then." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, White Elk setting a pace that challenged Rebecca without exhausting her. He moved with natural grace through the landscape, reading signs invisible to her untrained eye. A bent blade of grass indicating a recent passing, the distant circling of birds suggesting the presence of predators or carrion. As they walked, White Elk kept his promise to tell Rebecca more about their destination. The hunting camp, he explained, was situated in a valley protected by high bluffs on 3 sides. Natural springs provided fresh water year-round, and the surrounding forests and plains offered abundant game. "My father's father established this camp long before white settlers came," he said. "It has remained a place of safety through many seasons of change." "Who lives there now?" Rebecca asked, stepping carefully over a fallen log. "Few stay permanently. Mostly it serves as a gathering place during seasonal hunts." White Elk adjusted his pace slightly to allow her to navigate a particularly steep section of trail. "Currently, there may be 20 or 30 people, mostly hunters and their families from several bands. And they won't mind my presence?" White Elk was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Some will welcome you without question. Some will watch and wait. Some may never fully accept you." His dark eyes met hers briefly. "This is true. Among all peoples, is it not?" Rebecca thought of the frontier towns she'd lived in. How even after months of teaching their children, some families had maintained a cold distance, suspicious of her Eastern education and manners. "Yes," she agreed softly. "That's true everywhere, I suppose." They walked in silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts. Around midday, they stopped beside a small spring to refill their water containers, Rebecca's tin cup and White Elk's animal horn flask. As Rebecca cupped water in her hands, drinking deeply, she noticed White Elk had gone very still, his head tilted slightly as if listening. She froze, suddenly alert to potential danger. "What is it?" she whispered. "Horses," he replied quietly. "2, maybe 3, coming from the east." Rebecca's heart raced. "The bounty hunters." "Perhaps. We will know soon." White Elk gestured for her to follow him into a denser patch of brush several yards from the spring. "Stay low, watch, but make no sound." They crouched in the undergrowth, Rebecca's pulse pounding in her ears. Minutes later, 3 riders appeared, approaching the spring at a steady trot. Rebecca recognized 2 of them immediately, the bounty hunters who'd been asking questions in town. The third was unfamiliar, but his weather-beaten face and rifle marked him as a tracker. "They must have come off the stage here," one hunter was saying as they dismounted. "Trails clear as day leading to that old cabin site." "Cabin's gone, though," the second man replied, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "Flood took it, looks like." The tracker knelt by the spring, examining the ground with expert attention. "Someone was here," he announced. "Recently. Small boots, woman's size." He moved methodically outward from the spring. "And someone else." "Moccasins." Rebecca tensed. White Elk's hand settled lightly on her arm, a silent command to remain absolutely still. "Indian?" the first bounty hunter asked sharply. The tracker nodded. "Lakota, from the pattern, headed north." He squinted at the ground. 2, maybe 3 hours ahead of us." "Damn it," the second hunter swore. "If some buck's taken her, we'll never see that bounty." The tracker straightened. "Tracks are clear. Woman isn't being dragged or carried. She's walking alongside, steady pace." "Going willingly with a savage," the first hunter spat on the ground. "Judge Blackwood's gonna love that detail. Adds more to her crimes, consorting with Indians." "Maybe she doesn't know what she's gotten into," the second suggested. "These Lakota can be tricky, act all friendly until you're in their camp, then—" He drew a finger across his throat in a universal gesture. Rebecca's hand clenched involuntarily. The crude assumption that White Elk must be deceiving her, must have sinister motives, angered her more than she'd expected. "Either way, trail's fresh," the tracker concluded. "We follow it, we find her." The men remounted their horses, continuing in the direction White Elk and Rebecca had been traveling. White Elk remained motionless until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. "They follow our path," he said finally, his voice neutral. "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered, guilt washing over her. "I've led them right to you, to your people." White Elk studied her for a long moment. "You did not ask them to hunt you?" he pointed out, "and they would have found our trail regardless. The tracker is skilled." "What do we do now?" "We change our path." White Elk rose from their hiding place, offering her his hand. "The direct way is no longer safe. We go west first, through rougher country, then north. Will that throw them off?" "For a time." He considered the terrain ahead. "They have horses, which gives them speed but limits where they can go. We will use that against them." Rebecca accepted his help, rising to her feet. "How long will it take now?" 4 days, perhaps 5. The way will be harder." White Elk's expression remained impassive, but his eyes searched hers, gauging her resolve. Rebecca squared her shoulders. "I can handle harder," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "As long as it keeps them from following us to your camp." Something shifted in White Elk's demeanor, a subtle change she might have missed had she not been watching closely. A slight relaxation of his shoulders, a new warmth in his dark eyes. "You worry for my people's safety, not just your own," he observed. Rebecca nodded. "I've caused enough trouble. I won't bring danger to innocent people." White Elk studied her for another moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Come," he said, "we have much ground to cover before nightfall." As they set off on their new route, Rebecca realized something fundamental had changed. Between them, in expressing concern for his community, she had unwittingly passed some test of character White Elk had set for her. The trust growing between them was fragile, born of necessity and common danger, but it was real nonetheless. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, Rebecca dared to hope she might find not just temporary safety, but genuine allies in her ongoing flight from injustice. The western route White Elk chose led them through increasingly rugged terrain. By late afternoon, Rebecca's legs burned with the effort of climbing steep hillsides and navigating loose scree slopes. The deerskin dress proved far more practical than her teacher's attire would have been, allowing her freedom of movement her own clothes would have restricted. White Elk set a challenging pace, but never so fast that Rebecca couldn't maintain it. Occasionally he would pause at the crest of a hill, watching their back trail for any sign of pursuit. "Do you think we've lost them?" Rebecca asked during one such stop. White Elk's gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. "For now, the tracker is good, but he must follow where horses can go. This path," he gestured to the rough terrain they'd traversed, "forces them to circle wide." As the sun began its descent, White Elk led them into a narrow canyon Rebecca wouldn't have noticed without his guidance. The entrance was nearly invisible, obscured by a tumble of boulders and scrub juniper. "We rest here tonight," he announced, indicating a sandy area beneath a rock overhang similar to the previous night's shelter. Rebecca sank gratefully onto a smooth boulder, muscles quivering with exhaustion. The day's journey had been the most physically demanding of her life, yet she felt a curious pride in having kept up. White Elk disappeared briefly, returning with an armful of dry wood he must have gathered and stored on a previous visit. The practiced efficiency with which he constructed a small, nearly smokeless fire confirmed Rebecca's suspicion that this was a regularly used stopping point. "You've been here before," she observed. "Many times," White Elk confirmed, arranging stones around the fire to reflect heat inward. "This path connects our summer and winter grounds." As the fire established itself, casting warm light against the gathering dusk, White Elk taught Rebecca how to position herself to maximize warmth while maintaining vigilance. "Sleep with one ear listening," he advised, "even in places that seem safe." They ate more pemmican supplemented with something White Elk called prairie turnips, wild roots he'd gathered along their route. The starchy vegetables were a welcome addition to their diet, providing energy Rebecca knew she'd need for tomorrow's journey. As night settled around them, the canyon walls blocking the worst of the wind, Rebecca found herself studying her unlikely protector. In the dancing firelight, White Elk's features were striking: high cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that missed nothing. He wore his long black hair tied back with a simple leather thong, 2 eagle feathers secured at his temple. A small medicine pouch hung from a cord around his neck. "May I ask you something?" Rebecca ventured. White Elk looked up from the arrow he was fletching, a task he'd begun after their simple meal. "Your English is perfect," she continued when he nodded permission. "Better than many settlers I've met. Where did you learn it?" A shadow passed across White Elk's features. "The white man's school at Carlisle," he said after a moment. 6 winters. They took many children from my tribe." Rebecca had heard of the Indian boarding schools, institutions designed to civilize native children by separating them from their families and cultures. As a teacher, she'd read the government reports praising their success, but she'd harbored private doubts about the ethics of such forced assimilation. "That must have been difficult," she said softly. White Elk's hands stilled momentarily. "They cut our hair, forbade our language, beat children who spoke Lakota." His voice remained even, but Rebecca sensed the deep wounds beneath his controlled exterior. "They called it, 'Kill the Indian, save the man,'" Rebecca winced at the cruelty inherent in the phrase. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate. "When I returned to my people, I had to learn our ways again," White Elk continued, surprising her with his willingness to share this painful history. "Some things the white teachers could not erase." He touched the medicine pouch at his neck. "But some were lost. Yet you helped me, a white woman you don't even know." White Elk considered her for a long moment. "The actions of some do not make all people guilty," he said finally. "This is what my grandfather taught when I returned angry from the white man's school." "Wise words," Rebecca murmured. "I wish more people lived by them." They fell silent, the fire crackling between them. Rebecca thought about the complex history that had brought them to this moment. A Lakota hunter helping a white schoolteacher, both outsiders in their own way. "What will you do when the bounty hunters give up?" White Elk asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Rebecca stared into the flames. It was a question she'd been asking herself for 3 years. "Keep teaching if I can," she replied. "It's all I know, all I love doing." She sighed. "But I'll need a new name, a new story. Again." "How many names have you carried?" "3 so far. First Sarah Collins in Nebraska Territory, then Emma Winters in Wyoming." She smiled wryly. "Rebecca Morgan is actually closer to my real name than the others." White Elk nodded, understanding the necessity of shape-shifting identities when being hunted. "Among my people, a new name can mark a new beginning. After my return from Carlisle, I earned the name White Elk during my first buffalo hunt." "What were you called before?" Rebecca asked, then quickly added, "Unless that's too personal to share." "The white teachers called me John," he replied, a hint of distaste coloring the name. "Before that, I was called Wunbli Gleska, Spotted Eagle." "Spotted Eagle," Rebecca repeated, trying to pronounce the Lakota words correctly. "It suits you better than John." A rare smile flickered across White Elk's face, transforming his usually stoic expression. "Yes," he agreed, "but White Elk is the name I chose when I chose my path." The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the evening deepened. White Elk explained the fletching technique he was using, demonstrating how different feather configurations affected an arrow's flight. Rebecca described the one-room schoolhouse where she'd last taught, the challenges and joys of educating children from diverse homesteading families. When Rebecca finally settled into her blanket for the night, she realized this was the most she'd spoken about herself to anyone in years. The constant vigilance, the need to guard her words and history, had become so ingrained that she'd forgotten what it felt like to speak openly. White Elk took the first watch, his silhouette at the canyon entrance, a reassuring presence against the star-strewn sky. Despite the hard ground beneath her and the uncertainty of the days ahead, Rebecca fell asleep more easily than she had in months. Dawn arrived with a bird's warning call. Rebecca woke instantly to find White Elk already alert, bow in hand. "Riders," he whispered, motioning for her to remain still. "Not close, but following our general direction." Rebecca's heart pounded as she gathered her few possessions with quiet urgency. They extinguished the fire, scattered the ashes, and removed all traces of their presence from the canyon floor. "We go higher today," White Elk announced once they were ready, "where horses cannot follow." The path he chose made the previous day's journey seem like a casual stroll. They climbed steadily upward, using narrow game trails that clung to steep hillsides and skirted precipitous drops. Rebecca focused on placing each foot exactly where White Elk indicated, trying not to look down at the dizzying heights they were traversing. By midday, they had reached what appeared to be a dead end, a sheer rock face rising 50 feet above. "Them! Now what?" Rebecca asked, trying to mask her dismay. White Elk pointed to a nearly invisible crack in the cliff face. "The hunter's path," he said. "Narrow, but it will take us where we need to go." The path proved to be a natural chimney in the rock, barely wide enough for a person to edge through sideways. Rebecca swallowed hard, fighting against the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'll go first," White Elk offered. "Watch where. I place my hands and feet. Go slowly. The stone will hold you." Rebecca nodded mutely, watching as he demonstrated the technique, back against one wall, feet braced against the opposing surface, working upward with careful, controlled movements. When it was her turn, Rebecca took a deep breath and entered. The narrow passage, the rough stone scraped against her back and shoulders as she inched upward, focusing solely on the next handhold, the next foothold, refusing to think about the consequences of a misstep. Halfway up, her foot slipped. For one heart-stopping moment, she hung suspended by her arms alone, a scream building in her throat. "Rebecca!" White Elk's voice from above, calm and steady, anchored her. She looked up to see him reaching down, his expression revealing no doubt in her ability to continue. "Find your footing again," he instructed. "The ledge to your right. Feel for it with your toes." Rebecca forced herself to breathe, to focus. She felt blindly with her right foot until it found the small projection White Elk had indicated. Relief flooded through her as she re-established her position. "Good," White Elk approved. "Now continue, slow and steady." When she finally emerged at the top, muscles trembling from the exertion, Rebecca discovered they had accessed a high plateau invisible from below. The vista spread before them was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, all bathed in the golden light of afternoon. "Look," White Elk said quietly, pointing back the way they had come. Far below, 3 tiny figures on horseback moved through the landscape, the bounty hunters still following their general direction, but now separated from them by an impassable barrier. "They cannot reach us this way," White Elk confirmed. "Tomorrow we will be at the hunting camp." Rebecca's relief was so profound she felt momentarily lightheaded. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing no words could adequately express her gratitude. White Elk acknowledged her thanks with a slight nod. "The day grows late. We should make camp before darkness falls." As they walked across the plateau, Rebecca realized something fundamental had shifted within her. For 3 years, she had survived, by her wits alone, never allowing herself to truly rely on another person. Now, in placing her life literally in White Elk's hands, she had taken a step beyond mere survival towards something she had almost forgotten: trust. Whether that trust would prove well placed in the days to come remained to be seen. But for now, with the bounty hunters thwarted below and the promise of sanctuary ahead, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. The final day of their journey began with a mist-shrouded sunrise. Rebecca woke to find White Elk already alert, watching the eastern horizon with an air of anticipation. "We will reach the hunting camp by midday," he said when he noticed she was awake. "If we maintain a steady pace." They ate quickly and departed. Their plateau campsite, as the sun burned away the morning fog, the path now descended gradually, winding through stands of pine and aspen whose leaves had turned golden with autumn's touch. The air grew noticeably cooler as they moved northward, carrying the crisp scent of approaching winter. "Will your people stay at the hunting camp when snow comes?" Rebecca asked, as they navigated a stream crossing, stepping carefully on exposed stones. "Some will," White Elk replied. "Others will return to the reservation before the deep snows. The army agents prefer it when we stay where they can count us." The bitterness in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Rebecca had read enough about the reservation system to understand its purpose: to contain and control native populations under the guise of protection and civilization. "What will you do?" she ventured. White Elk was silent for several strides. "I hunt for those who cannot hunt for themselves," he finally answered. Old ones, widows, children, the government rations are never enough, especially in winter. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-aggrandizement, but Rebecca was struck by the quiet dignity in his response. Here was a man who had found purpose in resistance, not through violence, but through sustaining his people in the face of systematic deprivation. As the sun climbed higher, White Elk paused atop a ridge, pointing to a distant valley nestled between protective bluffs. "There," he said, "the hunting camp." Rebecca shaded her eyes, trying to make out details. From this distance, she could discern little more than a collection of structures, conical teepees interspersed with a few more permanent-looking cabins, arranged in a rough circle near a meandering creek. "How many people live there?" she asked. "Now? Perhaps 30 or 40, White Elk estimated. More will come as buffalo hunting season approaches." Buffalo hunting season. The phrase struck Rebecca as both foreign and familiar, a concept from a world parallel to the settler calendar she knew, with its planting seasons and harvest times. A reminder that the land sustained multiple ways of life simultaneously. They descended toward the valley, White Elk leading them on a path that offered continuous cover until they were within half a mile of the encampment. Then, unexpectedly, he stopped. "Wait here," he instructed, gesturing to a small clearing. "I must go ahead first, announce our arrival properly." Rebecca's heart sank. After days of traveling together, the prospect of being left alone, even temporarily, sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. "Is something wrong?" White Elk's expression softened slightly, recognizing her concern. "No, but I must speak to the elders before bringing a stranger into camp. It is our way." He hesitated, then added, "There are protocols, especially for bringing a white woman into our territory." Rebecca nodded, forcing down her apprehension. Of course there would be protocols. She was naive to think she could simply walk into a Lakota camp without formal introduction or approval. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not long. The sun will have moved only a small distance." White Elk pointed to where the sun stood in the sky, then to a position slightly westward. "Wait here. Do not follow the path to camp alone." With that, he was gone, moving through the trees with the silent efficiency she'd come to associate with him. Rebecca settled on a fallen log, alone for the first time in days. The solitude, once so familiar during her years on the run, now felt strange. She'd grown accustomed to White Elk's quiet presence, his understated protection. Without him, the forest sounds, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a distant hawk, the chittering of squirrels, seemed magnified, both comforting and concerning. Rebecca used the time to make herself as presentable as possible. She combed her fingers through her tangled hair, securing it in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She brushed dirt from the deerskin dress and washed her face and hands in a nearby stream. Small preparations, but they helped settle her nerves. True. To his word, White Elk returned before the sun had moved significantly in its arc. He was not alone. With him came an older woman with iron-grey braids and sharp, assessing eyes. She wore a dress similar to Rebecca's, but more elaborately adorned with beadwork and quillwork in geometric patterns. "This is Wichapi," White Elk introduced her. "My father's sister. She speaks for the women of the camp in council matters." Rebecca stood, uncertain of the proper greeting. She settled for a respectful nod. "Thank you for allowing me to come to your camp." Wichapi circled Rebecca slowly, examining her with unabashed curiosity. "My nephew says you are a teacher," she said in surprisingly fluent English. "That men hunt you for witnessing a powerful white man's crime." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, "that's true, and you wish to stay among us until these hunters forget your trail." "If you'll have me," Rebecca replied. "I don't want to bring trouble to your people, but I have nowhere else to go." Wichapi exchanged rapid words with White Elk in Lakota. Though Rebecca couldn't understand the language, the cadence suggested questions and answers, an assessment being made. Finally, the older woman turned back to Rebecca. "Those who seek sanctuary among us must contribute," she stated firmly. "What skills do you bring?" Rebecca considered carefully. "I teach reading and writing, arithmetic, history. I can sew, though not as beautifully as your people." She gestured to Wichapi's intricate beadwork. "I learn quickly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Can you cook, clean hides, gather medicines?" "I can cook settler foods," Rebecca admitted. "The rest I would need to learn." A hint of amusement flickered in Wichapi's dark eyes. "At least you do not claim knowledge you do not possess." She nodded once, decisively. "You may come. You will. Stay in my lodge until the council decides your place among us." Relief washed over Rebecca. She had passed the first test. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll work hard to earn my keep." "Come," Wichapi instructed. "The day grows short, and there is much to explain before you enter our camp." As they walked the remaining distance, Wichapi outlined the basic protocols Rebecca would need to observe: how to enter a lodge properly, which areas of the camp were restricted, how to address elders. White elk translated occasional terms or concepts that had no direct English equivalent. "Our ways may seem strange to you," Wichapi concluded as they approached the camp's perimeter. "But they have kept our people alive through many winters and many trials. Respect them even when you do not understand them." "I will," Rebecca promised. They crested a small rise, and the hunting camp spread before them in its entirety. Rebecca's first impression was one of ordered activity. This was no haphazard collection of dwellings, but a carefully organized community. Children played near the central fire pit, while women worked at various tasks, scraping hides stretched on frames, weaving baskets, preparing food. Several men were butchering what appeared to be a deer, while others repaired weapons or tended to horses in a corral on the camp's edge. As they entered the camp, activity briefly halted. Curious eyes turned in their direction, some merely interested, others openly suspicious. A group of children ran forward, stopping a respectful distance away to stare at Rebecca with undisguised fascination. "They have never seen a white woman up close," White Elk explained quietly, "only from distance when hunting parties pass near settler wagons." Rebecca offered a small smile to the children. One little girl, braver than the rest, stepped forward and touched Rebecca's skirt with tentative fingers, then darted back to the safety of her companions. The simple interaction broke some of the tension. Women returned to their tasks, though Rebecca remained aware of their sidelong glances. Wichapi led them to a large teepee near the center of the camp. Unlike the others, which were decorated with simple painted designs, this one featured elaborate pictographs depicting what appeared to be hunting scenes and celestial bodies. "My lodge," Wichapi announced. "You will stay here until you learn our ways." Inside, the teepee was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. A small fire burned in a central pit, smoke rising through the open apex above. Sleeping pallets lined the perimeter, covered with buffalo robes and woven blankets. Various containers, beautifully crafted baskets and parfleche bags, were arranged neatly along one side, while tools and cooking implements hung from the lodge poles. "Sit," Wichapi instructed, indicating a place near the fire. "Rest now. Later there will be council." As Rebecca settled onto the offered buffalo robe, absorbing the unfamiliar surroundings, Wichapi spoke rapidly to White Elk. He nodded, responded briefly, then turned to Rebecca. "I must report to the elders," he explained. "Wichapi will see to your needs." Rebecca felt a momentary panic at the prospect of his departure. White Elk had been her sole anchor in this strange new world. "Will I see you again?" she asked immediately, regretting how the question revealed her dependency. A hint of understanding softened his normally stoic expression. "Yes, This is my people's camp. I will be here. He paused, then added, You are safe now, Rebecca Morgan. Try to rest. After he had gone, Wichapi offered Rebecca a wooden bowl filled with a rich stew of meat and wild roots. Eat, she commanded, then sleep. The council will not meet until evening fires are lit. The stew was delicious, hearty and warming after days of travel rations. After she had eaten, Rebecca found her eyelids growing heavy, the accumulated fatigue of their journey finally catching up with her. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep on the comfortable buffalo robe. She woke to the sound of drums and the smell of wood smoke. Wichapi sat nearby, stringing tiny glass beads onto a sinew thread. With practiced precision, the council gathers, the older woman announced without looking up from her work. Soon they will send for you. Rebecca sat up, straightening her borrowed dress as best she could. What should I expect? They will ask, why you come, what you seek among us. Wichapi tied off her thread with nimble fingers. Speak truth. Our elders see through lies as hawk sees through grass. Before Rebecca could ask more questions, the teepee flap moved aside. A young boy entered, speaking quickly in Lakota. It is time, Wichapi translated, rising to her feet. Come, remember what I told you about respect. Do not speak until spoken to. Answer directly when asked. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding as she followed Wichapi out into the gathering dusk. The moment of judgment had arrived. Whatever happened next would determine not just her immediate safety, but the entire course of her uncertain future. The council lodge stood at the center of the camp, larger than the surrounding teepees. As Rebecca approached, flanked by Wichapi, she noted the respectful silence that fell over those gathered outside. The drumming continued from within, a steady heartbeat that seemed to match her own racing pulse. Wichapi paused at the entrance. Speak from here, she instructed, touching Rebecca's chest. Not just from here. She tapped Rebecca's forehead. Our elders value honest hearts above clever words. Inside, the lodge was illuminated by a central fire, its light casting long shadows across the faces of those seated in a circle. Rebecca recognized White Elk immediately, sitting slightly apart from a group of older men who wore eagle feathers and elaborate beadwork that marked them as leaders. An elderly man with deeply lined features and snow-white braids raised his hand, silencing the drums. Wichapi guided Rebecca to stand before him, then took her place in the circle among the women. I am Many Horses, the elder said in halting but clear English. I speak for this council. White Elk tells us you seek sanctuary among us. Why should we grant this to a white woman? Rebecca felt every eye in the lodge upon her. She recalled Wichapi's advice and spoke directly, without embellishment. 3 years ago, I witnessed Judge William Blackwood, an important man in St. Louis, stealing money from people who trusted him. When he discovered I knew, he accused me of the theft instead. No one questioned his word against mine. She paused, then continued. I've been running ever since, teaching in small towns until the bounty hunters find me. Now they're closer than ever before. And why come to us? Asked a younger man seated near Many Horses. Why not to your own people? My own people would return me to St. Louis for the reward, Rebecca answered honestly. White Elk saved me during the flood. He offered shelter when no one else would. Many Horses exchanged words in Lakota with the other council members. Though Rebecca couldn't understand the language, she recognized the cautious tone of their deliberation. Bringing you here puts our people at risk, Many Horses finally said, returning to English. Bounty hunters who follow you may bring soldiers. The army looks for any excuse to punish Lakota who live beyond the reservation. I understand, Rebecca acknowledged. I don't wish to bring danger to your community. If you decide I should leave, I will go. This straightforward acceptance of their concerns seemed to surprise some council members. White Elk spoke for the first time, his words in Lakota clearly carrying weight among the elders. After further discussion, many horses addressed Rebecca again. White Elk speaks well of your courage. Wichapi says you offer useful skills. We will allow you to stay until the moon completes its cycle. During this time, you will learn our ways and contribute to our camp. He fixed her with a penetrating gaze. After the full moon, we will decide if you may remain longer. Relief washed over Rebecca. A month of safety. It was more than she had dared hope for. Thank you, she said, bowing her head respectfully. I'll work hard to earn my place here. You will stay with Wichapi. Learn from her. Many horses continued. Her wisdom runs deep as the river. Listen well. The council concluded with ceremonial pipe smoking, which Rebecca observed in respectful silence. As people began to file out of the lodge, White Elk approached her. You spoke well, he said quietly. Simple truth often convinces where elaborate explanations fail. Thank you for speaking on my behalf, Rebecca replied. I know it couldn't have been easy to vouch for a stranger. Something like amusement flickered in White Elk's eyes. You are no longer a stranger. You are a guest of my family now. He glanced toward Wichapi, who was speaking with the elders. My aunt does not accept responsibilities lightly. If she has agreed to teach you, she sees something worth cultivating. Before Rebecca could respond, Wichapi rejoined them, her expression revealing nothing of her conversation with the council. Come, she instructed Rebecca. Morning arrives early in our camp. You will need rest. The following days passed in a blur of new experiences as Rebecca was immersed in the rhythms of Lakota life. She woke before dawn with Wichapi to gather water from the creek, learning to carry the heavy skin bags balanced on her hip as the older women did. Breakfast consisted of wasna, pounded dried meat mixed with berries and fat, which provided sustained energy for the day's labor. Wichapi proved a demanding but fair teacher. She assigned Rebecca increasingly complex tasks, demonstrating each skill with practiced precision before expecting Rebecca to attempt it. There was hide scraping, an arduous process that left Rebecca's arms aching but gradually revealed soft, supple leather from what had begun as stiff, raw skins. There was food preparation, including the proper way to dry meat in strips for winter storage and how to identify edible roots and berries in the surrounding woods. Your hands are soft, Wichapi observed on the third day, examining Rebecca's blistered palms after a morning of hide scraping. But they are strong. They will toughen. Rebecca had smiled at what, coming from Wichapi, amounted to high praise. I've always worked with my mind, she admitted. This is different. Mind and hands must work together, Wichapi replied, applying a soothing salve to Rebecca's raw skin. One without the other leaves a person half complete. The women of the camp, initially reserved in Rebecca's presence, gradually accepted her as they witnessed her willingness to learn and her lack of complaint about the physical demands placed upon her. Young mothers would correct her technique gently when she struggled with a task. Elderly women would nod approval when she persisted despite difficulty. The children were the quickest to warm to her. After noticing Rebecca's patient interactions with the youngest members of Wichapi's extended family, several mothers began bringing their children to the older woman's teepee in the evenings. Rebecca found herself telling stories from her teaching days, translating English nursery rhymes into simple concepts the Lakota children could understand. When a 7-year-old boy named Little Fox expressed curiosity about the written symbols, in Rebecca's treasured book of poetry, she began informal reading lessons, using sticks to draw letters in the dirt. Soon, a small group gathered each evening for these impromptu classes. You teach differently than the mission school, observed Running Deer, a young mother whose daughter attended Rebecca's dirt drawing lessons. You do not hit when they make mistakes. Rebecca was horrified at the implication. Learning should never involve fear, she said firmly. Children learn best through encouragement and discovery. Running Deer studied her thoughtfully. Perhaps not all white teachers are the same, she conceded. By the end of her first week, Rebecca had established a routine that blended her assigned duties with opportunities to share her own knowledge. Mornings were devoted to physical labor, hide preparation, wood gathering, food processing. Afternoons found her assisting Wichapi with crafting and mending. Evenings belonged to the children, with their eager questions and quick minds. White elk came and went during this period, sometimes disappearing for days on hunting expeditions, then returning with deer or antelope to supplement the camp's food stores. When present, he seemed to observe Rebecca's integration with quiet approval, occasionally offering guidance on particularly difficult skills or translating complex cultural concepts which Wichapi struggled to explain in English. One evening, as Rebecca sat near Wichapi's fire, mending a tear in one of the older woman's dresses, White Elk entered with an unexpected gift, sheets of paper and 2 pencils. "For your teaching," he explained, presenting them to Rebecca. From the trading post near the reservation, Rebecca accepted the simple supplies with disproportionate gratitude. "Thank you. This will help tremendously with the children's lessons." "Where did you go?" Wichapi asked her nephew in Lakota, though Rebecca had begun to understand basic phrases. White Elk's reply was too rapid for Rebecca to follow, but she caught enough to understand he had traveled to the reservation for some purpose beyond mere trading. Later, when Wichapi had gone to visit a neighbor, Rebecca questioned him directly. "You went to the reservation to ask about the bounty hunters, didn't you?" White Elk didn't deny it. "Information is as valuable as any other resource," he said, "especially when danger threatens." "And?" Rebecca prompted, both dreading and needing. To hear his report, they remained at Yellow Creek Station for 3 days, then headed south toward Deadwood. White Elk's expression revealed little. "It appears they've decided you continued in that direction rather than coming north with me." Relief flooded through Rebecca, followed immediately by suspicion. "That seems too convenient. What aren't you telling me?" A rare smile touched White Elk's lips. "Perhaps I arranged for certain tracks to be discovered. Perhaps a trapper mentioned seeing a woman matching your description boarding a stage for Deadwood." "You planted false evidence," Rebecca realized, impressed by his foresight. "I merely ensured the truth they wanted to find was available to them," White Elk corrected. "Men often see what they expect to see." Rebecca shook her head in amazement. "You risked a lot to do that," White Elk shrugged. "The risk was small, the benefit significant." An unexpected warmth bloomed in Rebecca's chest at his matter-of-fact protection. For 3 years, she had been entirely self-reliant, never allowing herself to depend on others. The experience of being genuinely safeguarded by someone else was both unfamiliar and deeply moving. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Live well, learn our ways. That is thanks enough." White Elk rose to leave, then hesitated. "Tomorrow I will show you something. Be ready at first light." As he departed, Rebecca wondered what new aspect of Lakota life awaited her. Despite the aches of unaccustomed physical labor and the occasional frustrations of cultural misunderstandings, she had found unexpected contentment in the rhythm of days here. The constant vigilance, the ever-present fear that had been her companion, for 3 years, had begun to ease. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, Rebecca dared to contemplate not just survival, but a life worth living. One with purpose beyond mere evasion, with connections beyond the superficial acquaintances. Her fugitive existence had permitted, whether such a life was possible for a white woman among the Lakota remained uncertain. But as she watched the camp settle for the night, children being tucked into buffalo robes by their mothers, elders gathering for evening conversations around small fires, Rebecca felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Dawn arrived with a pearlescent light filtering through the smoke hole of Wichapi's tepi. Rebecca woke instantly, the habits of early rising now ingrained after 2 weeks in the Lakota camp. She dressed quickly in the deerskin outfit Wichapi had crafted for her, far more practical than her original dress, and now adorned with simple beadwork Rebecca had completed under the older woman's patient instruction. Outside, the camp was just stirring to life. Smoke rose from morning cook fires, women gathered at the creek for water, and children emerged sleepily from their family dwellings. White Elk waited at the edge of the camp, a small leather pack slung over his shoulder, and 2 horses, his own dappled grey stallion and a smaller chestnut mare, standing quietly beside him. "Good morning," Rebecca greeted him, suddenly self-conscious. "You said to be ready at first light." White Elk nodded approvingly. "You learn our rhythms quickly," he observed. "Today, I show you something few white eyes have seen." He gestured to the chestnut mare. "Can you ride?" Rebecca approached the horse cautiously. "I've ridden a few times, but I'm hardly skilled." "Sunflower is gentle," White Elk assured her, helping Rebecca mount in the Lakota way, without stirrups or saddle. Just a simple blanket, secured with a leather girth. She will not let you fall if you treat her with respect. Once Rebecca was seated comfortably, learning to grip with her knees rather than rely on stirrups, White Elk mounted his own horse with practiced ease. They set off at a walk, following a narrow trail that led westward from the camp toward a series of bluffs visible in the distance. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked as her confidence on horseback grew enough to allow conversation. "To the Painted Rocks," White Elk replied. "A place sacred to my people for many generations, a place of teaching." They rode in companionable silence, the pace leisurely enough for Rebecca to observe the landscape, rolling prairies giving way to scattered pine groves, meadows bright with late wildflowers, a hawk circling overhead in the clear morning sky. The physical beauty of this land struck her anew each day, so different from the cultivated gardens of Philadelphia or the muddy streets of frontier towns. After about an hour's ride, they approached a narrow canyon entrance, its walls rising sharply on either side. White Elk dismounted, indicating Rebecca should do the same. "We walk from here," he explained, securing the horses to a sturdy pine. "The path narrows, and this place demands we approach on our own feet." The canyon was cool and shadowed, its sandstone walls streaked with layers of red, orange, and cream. A small stream trickled along the canyon floor, carving its patient path through stone over countless centuries. Rebecca followed White Elk along its bank, noticing how he moved with particular reverence in this place, his normally soundless tread even more deliberate. "Long ago," White Elk spoke softly as they walked, "when the people first came to these lands, our ancestors sought wisdom from Wakantanka, the great mystery you might call God. They fasted and prayed, seeking visions to guide the people through difficult times. The canyon widened suddenly into a circular grotto, its walls smooth and towering nearly 100 feet above them. Rebecca gasped at what she saw. The entire circumference was covered with paintings. Some were clearly ancient, their pigments faded to ghostly outlines. Others appeared more recent, their colors still vibrant against the pale stone. "The Vision Place," White Elk announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Here, those who seek guidance may find it. Here, the wisdom of our ancestors remains visible for those who know how to see." Rebecca turned slowly, taking in the elaborate artwork surrounding them. There were stylized human figures with arms outstretched toward buffalo, deer and other animals. There were celestial symbols, suns, moons, and stars arranged in patterns. There were handprints pressed directly onto the rock face, some so small they must have belonged to children. "It's beautiful," she breathed. afraid to speak too loudly in this sacred space. Each image tells a story, White Elk explained, pointing to a sequence of figures that appeared to be dancing around a central fire. This one recalls the first green corn ceremony, when my people learned to cultivate the earth alongside hunting. He moved to another section, indicating a depiction of mounted warriors confronting what appeared to be soldiers. And this one remembers a battle against blue coats, when our warriors protected the women and children from those who would drive us from our hunting grounds. Rebecca studied the images with growing wonder, recognizing the historical and spiritual significance of what she was being shown. "Why have you brought me here?" she asked finally. White Elk considered his answer carefully. "For many reasons. To help you understand my people beyond what you see in daily camp life, to show you that our history stretches back through many generations, recorded in our own way." He paused. "And because the council will soon decide your fate among us. You should know what it means to be Lakota before that day comes." Rebecca nodded, humbled by his trust in sharing something so significant. "Thank you for showing me this." They spent the morning in the canyon, White Elk translating the stories embedded in the rock art, explaining the spiritual significance of certain symbols, and describing the vision quest tradition that had created many of the paintings. Rebecca listened with rapt attention, asking questions that revealed her genuine interest and respect. As midday approached, they shared a simple meal of pemmican and dried berries beside the small stream. The atmosphere was contemplative, both lost in their own thoughts until White Elk suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the canyon entrance. "What is it?" Rebecca whispered, instantly alert to his change in demeanor. "Horses," he replied quietly. "Many horses, coming this way." Fear spiked through Rebecca's chest. "The bounty hunters?" White Elk shook his head. "Too many, and they would not know of this place." He rose in one fluid motion, gesturing for Rebecca to follow. "We must see who approaches." They made their way silently toward the canyon entrance, using the rock formations for cover. Before they reached the mouth of the canyon, White Elk halted, crouching behind a large boulder and indicating Rebecca should do the same. From this vantage point, they could observe without being seen. A group of riders appeared on the trail they had followed earlier, at least a dozen men, most in army blue, led by a lieutenant whose insignia gleamed in the sunlight. With them rode two figures in civilian clothes, one a weathered frontiersman who appeared to be acting as a guide, the other a well-dressed man whose bearing suggested authority. "Soldiers," Rebecca whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. "Why would the army be here?" "That is not a regular patrol," White Elk observed grimly. "That is a search party." As the group drew closer, Rebecca could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the breeze. "Waste of time, Commissioner," the lieutenant was saying. "If there are hostiles in these hills, they won't be advertising their presence." The tall, well-dressed man, evidently a government commissioner, replied with evident irritation. "The Department of Indian Affairs has received reports of Lakota warriors raiding settlements near Deadwood. These so-called hunting parties are in direct violation of the treaty. They should be on the reservation where they belong." Rebecca's heart sank. There had been no raids. She knew enough about the camp's activities now to be certain of that. This was either a mistake or, more likely, a deliberate fabrication to justify military action against hostile natives. "The hunting camp," she whispered urgently to White Elk. "They must be searching for it." White Elk's expression remained impassive, but the tension in his body betrayed his concern. "If they find our camp unprepared, there will be trouble. Our hunters carry weapons. The soldiers will see threat where none exists." "We have to warn them," Rebecca insisted. "Yes," White Elk agreed, "but we cannot return the way we came. The soldiers would see us." He studied the terrain, thinking rapidly. There is another path, longer, more difficult, but it will bring us to camp before them if we move quickly. They retreated deeper into the canyon, White Elk leading Rebecca to a narrow fissure in the western wall that she would have overlooked, entirely without his guidance. The passage was tight, requiring them to move sideways in some places, the rough stone scraping against their clothing. "What about the horses?" Rebecca asked as they emerged on the other side into a narrow ravine. "They will find their way home if we don't return," White Elk replied. "They know the trail to camp. For now, speed matters more than comfort." The path he chose was indeed difficult, a challenging route through broken country that required climbing in some places and wading through fast-moving streams in others. Rebecca followed without complaint, understanding the urgency that drove them forward. White Elk set a punishing pace, yet frequently checked to ensure she could maintain it, occasionally offering a hand over particularly treacherous sections. "Will we reach the camp in time?" Rebecca asked during a brief pause to drink from a spring. "If the soldiers stop to rest their horses, yes." White Elk's gaze swept the horizon. "They will approach from the east, following the main trail. We come from the west, over land they would consider impassable." As they continued their grueling journey, Rebecca's mind raced with the implications of what they'd witnessed. The presence of a government commissioner suggested this was more than a routine patrol. The mention of treaty violations hinted at a broader agenda, perhaps an attempt to force the remaining free-roaming Lakota onto the reservation permanently. And what would happen to her if the soldiers discovered the camp? A white woman living among the Lakota would raise questions she couldn't easily answer. If her identity became known, the bounty on her head would certainly interest an army lieutenant looking to supplement his meager pay. By late afternoon, exhaustion pulled at Rebecca's limbs, each step becoming an act of will. Just as she thought she couldn't go much farther, they crested a ridge, and the hunting camp came into view below, peaceful and unaware of the approaching threat. "We made it," she breathed in relief. White Elk nodded grimly. "Now we must prepare, quickly." They descended toward the camp, where the sight of them approaching from the unexpected western direction caused immediate attention. Many horses emerged from his lodge, alarm evident in his expression as he took in their disheveled, urgent appearance. White Elk called out in Lakota, his voice carrying across the camp. Rebecca recognized enough words to understand the essence. "Soldiers coming, women and children hide, warriors prepare but do not threaten." Controlled chaos erupted as the camp mobilized with practiced efficiency. Women gathered children and essential belongings, heading toward a stand of dense trees behind the camp. Warriors collected weapons, but, following many horses' instructions, kept them largely out of sight. Several young men sprinted to specific tepes, emerging with bundles Rebecca didn't recognize. Wichapi appeared at Rebecca's side, gripping her arm firmly. "Come," she ordered. "You must not be seen when the blue coats arrive." Rebecca hesitated, looking toward White Elk, who was deep in rapid conversation with the council elders. "I can help," she insisted, "if they see a white woman living peacefully among you. It might prevent them from—" "No!" Wichapi cut her off sharply. "If they see you, they will take you away, ask many questions. Your secrets become exposed. This helps no one." She tugged insistently. "Now come. No arguments." Recognizing the wisdom in the older woman's words, Rebecca allowed herself to be led toward the tree line. As they hurried away from the camp, she glanced back to see White Elk watching her go. His expression unreadable at this distance, but his attention unwavering until she disappeared into the protective shadows of the forest. Wichapi led Rebecca deep into the forest, following a barely visible trail that wound between ancient trees. Several women and children had already gathered in a small clearing, their faces tense but their movements controlled. There was no panic, only the quiet efficiency of those who had practiced such evacuations before. "Stay here," Wichapi instructed. guiding Rebecca to sit beside a large fallen log that provided some concealment. "Do not move until someone comes for you." "What's going to happen?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman's weathered face revealed little emotion. "The men will speak with the soldiers. They will show empty hands, calm voices. They will say we hunt with permission, break no treaties." She paused, then added grimly, "Whether soldiers listen is another matter." Rebecca wanted to protest, to insist on helping somehow, but Vichapi had already turned away, organizing the children into small groups and assigning older girls to watch the youngest ones. The camp's grandmothers settled nearby, their wrinkled faces impassive, but their dark eyes alert. From their hidden vantage point, Rebecca could see nothing of the camp, though occasionally voices carried on the breeze, too distant to distinguish words, but the cadence suggested the soldiers had arrived and discussions were underway. She strained to hear, desperate for some indication of what was happening. A young woman named Dawn Flower sat beside Rebecca, her infant son cradled against her chest. "You worry for White Elk," she observed quietly. Rebecca started at the directness of the statement. "I worry for everyone," she corrected, though the tightness in her chest suggested Dawn Flower had touched on a deeper truth. "He is a good man," Dawn Flower continued, adjusting her blanket around the sleeping baby. "Strong in the old ways, but wise about the new world too. Not many men can walk between those worlds with such balance." Before Rebecca could respond, a twig snapped nearby. Every head turned toward the sound, mothers instinctively pulling children closer. A moment later, a young Lakota boy of perhaps 12 emerged through the underbrush, his expression serious beyond his years. "Running Fox," Wichapi addressed him. "What news?" "Many soldiers," the boy reported, slightly breathless from his run. "They say we must return to the reservation within 3 days. The white leader shows papers, speaks of broken treaties." "And our men?" Wichapi asked. "They listen. They show no weapons." Running Fox glanced at Rebecca before adding, "White Elk speaks English to the soldiers' leader. Many horses stands with him. They say we have broken no laws, that we hunt with permission from the Indian agent." Rebecca's heart sank. She knew from her years on the frontier that such permissions were often ignored when convenient for territorial authorities. Documents could be lost, verbal agreements denied, treaties reinterpreted to serve whatever agenda was currently favored in Washington. "What else, child?" Wichapi pressed, sensing the boy held back something. Running Fox shifted uncomfortably. "The tracker with the soldiers, he sees things others miss. He found a white woman's footprint near the main fire pit. He asks many questions about it." A murmur of concern rippled through the hidden group. Rebecca felt the weight of worried glances upon her. "The white leader says they search for a criminal woman from the east," Running Fox continued. "He shows a paper with a drawing. They think she might seek shelter with Indians." Rebecca's blood ran cold. The bounty hunters must have reached Deadwood and reported their suspicions to the authorities. Now the army was involved in the search, a far more formidable threat than 3 hired guns. "Did they show the paper to our men?" Wichapi asked sharply. Running Fox nodded. "White Elk looked at it. He said no such woman has been seen." A temporary relief washed over Rebecca, quickly replaced by fresh worry. White Elk had lied directly to government officials, an offense that could bring severe punishment if discovered. "Gota. And back," Wichapi instructed the boy. "Watch and listen. Return if anything changes." As Running Fox disappeared back toward the camp, Dawn Flower turned to Rebecca. "You are the woman they seek," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Rebecca nodded, unable to deny it. "I'm sorry. I never meant to bring danger to your people." "Danger walks with us always," the young mother replied with surprising equanimity. "It has been so since the first white men came with their paper promises and speaking sticks." The minutes stretched into hours as they waited in tense silence. Rebecca's imagination conjured increasingly dire scenarios. White Elk arrested, the camp destroyed, herself dragged back to St. Louis in chains. She tried to focus on practical considerations. If she had to flee again, which direction would offer the best chance of escape? How far could she get without supplies? Would Wichapi help her, or would the threat to the camp override any loyalty to a white outsider? The afternoon shadows lengthened into evening. Running Fox returned twice more with updates. The soldiers were checking each teepee, ostensibly looking for weapons, but clearly searching for signs of Rebecca's presence. The commissioner was growing frustrated with the lack of evidence to support his accusations of treaty violations. White Elk and many horses continued to maintain a calm, diplomatic stance, despite increasingly provocative questions. As twilight descended, the forest grew quiet save for nightbirds beginning their evening calls. The waiting women had settled into resigned patience, sharing food and water, speaking in hushed tones. Rebecca sat apart, the guilt of having brought this scrutiny upon people who had shown her nothing but kindness weighting her shoulders like a physical burden. A decision crystallized in her mind. If the soldiers found evidence of her presence, the consequences for the Lakota would be severe. She couldn't allow that to happen, not after everything White Elk and his people had done for her. Rebecca rose quietly, gathering her meager belongings. She would slip away in the darkness, leave clear tracks heading east, away from the camp, for the soldiers to find. Perhaps they would follow, drawing their attention from the Lakota. She had taken only 3 steps when Wichapi materialized, before her seemingly from nowhere. "Where do you go?" the older woman demanded. "I'm putting your people at risk," Rebecca whispered. "If I leave now, create a trail for them to follow." "Foolish girl," Wichapi interrupted, her voice sharp but low. "You would be caught before dawn, and your capture would only confirm what the soldiers suspect, that we harbor fugitives." "I can't just hide while everyone else faces danger because of me," Rebecca protested. Wichapi's expression softened slightly. "This danger existed before you came. It will remain after you are gone. The Bluecoats need no true reason to threaten us, only excuses." She took Rebecca's arm firmly. "Now sit. Wait. Trust." Rebecca reluctantly resumed her place, but the restless energy of her thwarted plan left her tense and alert. Thus, she was the first to hear the approaching footsteps, too heavy for Running Fox, too deliberate for someone in flight. "Someone comes," she whispered urgently to Wichapi. The Lakota women gathered their children close, some reaching for small knives hidden in their clothing. Wichapi stepped forward, positioning herself between the approaching sound and the others. A familiar figure emerged from the deepening shadows. White Elk moved with his characteristic grace, despite obvious exhaustion. "The soldiers leave," he announced without preamble. "They make camp 2 miles east. They will return tomorrow for final words, then depart." Relief swept through the group. Mothers embraced their children, and the tension that had held them rigid for hours finally began to ease. "And the search for the white woman?" Wichapi asked, her eyes flicking briefly toward Rebecca. "The commissioner believes she fled to Canada," White Elk replied. "Their tracker found sign of a woman traveling north with traders. He is convinced it is her." Rebecca's breath caught. "Another false trail." White Elk's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "The crow who trades with us has a wife with small feet. They left yesterday for their northern hunting grounds. A fortunate coincidence." Wichapi's expression remained skeptical. "The soldiers accept this too easily." "The lieutenant grows weary of the commissioner's obsessions," White Elk explained. "He has real duties at Fort Robinson, not ghost chases through the hills. He persuades the commissioner that their report can say they investigated thoroughly and found nothing." "We return to camp now?" Dawnflower asked, her sleeping infant stirring against her chest. White Elk shook his head. "Not yet. We wait until the soldiers are truly gone. They may send night scouts to observe us. As the others began to prepare for a night in the forest, making simple shelters from branches and settling children on soft beds of pine needles, White Elk drew Rebecca aside. "You are safe for now," he said quietly, "but we must talk about what comes next." Rebecca nodded, understanding the implicit message. The immediate danger might have passed, but her presence still posed a risk to the community. "I've already decided to leave," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Once the soldiers are gone, I'll—" "No," White Elk interrupted, surprising her. "That is not what I meant." He studied her face in the fading light. "The council met before the soldiers came. They reached their decision about your staying among us." Rebecca's heart quickened. In the chaos of the soldiers' arrival, she'd forgotten that today marked the end of her probationary month with the Lakota. "And?" she asked, barely daring to hope. "You may stay," White Elk stated simply. "You have proven yourself willing to learn our ways, respectful of our traditions. The children flourish under your teaching. The women speak well of your hard work." Joy surged through Rebecca, immediately tempered by the reality of their situation. "But the soldiers, the commissioner, they'll be watching more closely now," White Elk nodded. "Which is why we must be more careful. You cannot join hunting parties or trade missions. You must stay close to camp." His dark eyes held hers steadily. "It will be a smaller life than you might wish. A smaller life in freedom is better than a larger one in chains," Rebecca replied with conviction. Something shifted in White Elk's expression, a softening, a warmth she hadn't seen before. "There is another matter," he said, his voice taking on a formal quality. "Many Horses wishes to speak with you when we return to camp. He has a proposal." Before Rebecca could question him further, White Elk was called away to help with the forest shelters. She rejoined the women, assisting with gathering pine boughs for bedding and helping to distribute the limited food they'd brought. As night settled fully over the forest, the fugitive group nestled into their makeshift camps. Despite the hardship of sleeping rough, there was a sense of community that transcended their circumstances. Women sharing blankets, grandmothers telling quiet stories to wide-eyed children, young mothers singing soft lullabies. Rebecca found herself between Whichapi and Dawnflower, their shared body heat a comfort against the autumn chill. Above them, stars pierced the canopy in brilliant pinpoints, unconcerned with the human dramas unfolding beneath their eternal watch. "What proposal does Many Horses have?" Rebecca whispered to Whichapi, curiosity overcoming her fatigue. The older woman's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "He believes you need a more permanent place among us," she replied cryptically, a connection that even the blue coats would hesitate to break. Something in her tone made Rebecca's pulse quicken, but Whichapi would say no more, instructing her to sleep instead. "Tomorrow brings its own challenges," she murmured. "Strength comes with rest." As Rebecca drifted towards sleep, her mind filled with possibilities. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she allowed herself to imagine not just surviving, but belonging, truly belonging to a community that valued her for her skills and character rather than her background or connections. Whether such belonging was possible for someone with her history remained to be seen. But as she gazed at the stars between swaying pine branches, Rebecca felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for 3 long years. Whatever Many Horses proposed, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she had found something worth fighting for. A place where past mistakes didn't define future possibilities, where strength was measured not in power but in perseverance, and where even a fugitive schoolteacher might eventually find home. The women and children returned to the camp. At dawn, After White Elk's scouts confirmed the soldiers had indeed departed for their temporary camp to the east. The hunting grounds were unnaturally quiet, the usual morning activity subdued as everyone prepared for the commissioner's final visit. Many horses summoned Rebecca to his lodge immediately upon their return. She entered with trepidation, uncertain what proposal awaited her. The elderly chief sat beside his small fire, his weathered face solemn in the flickering light. White Elk stood nearby, his expression unreadable. "Sit," many horses instructed, gesturing to a place across the fire from him. Rebecca settled onto the offered buffalo robe, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of respect she'd learned during her weeks among the Lakota. "White Elk tells me you wish to stay with our people," many horses began without preamble. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, "if I'm permitted to do so." The old chief studied her, his dark eyes penetrating. "A white woman living openly among us brings danger, not just to herself, but to all." "I understand," Rebecca replied. "I'll accept whatever decision you make." Many horses nodded approvingly at her response. "The council believes you have earned a place here. Your teaching helps our children understand the changing world. Your willingness to learn our ways shows respect few white people offer." Relief flooded through Rebecca, but she sensed there was more to come. "However," many horses continued, "you cannot simply live among us as an outsider. The soldiers will return, questions will be asked. You need a reason for being here that even white authorities must respect." He gestured to White Elk, who stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "Among your people, certain bonds are considered sacred, protected even by your government's laws." Understanding dawned slowly. Rebecca's gaze shifted between the two. "Men," her heart suddenly racing. "You mean marriage?" she said quietly. White Elk nodded. "If you became family to the Lakota through marriage, even the army would hesitate to interfere. They might not approve, but they would have no grounds to remove you against your will." Rebecca sat in stunned silence, absorbing the implications of this proposal. Marriage was not just a solution to her precarious position, it was a profound commitment, a binding of her fate permanently to that of the Lakota. "This is not a decision to make hastily," many horses added, seeing her expression. "You must consider carefully what such a path would mean." "Who?" Rebecca began, then faltered, uncertain how to phrase her question. A flicker of what might have been amusement crossed White Elk's stoic features. "Several unmarried men have expressed interest," he said. "They recognize your strength and skills. But the choice would be yours," many horses assured her. "Forced unions bring unhappiness, and we have enough sorrow already." Rebecca looked directly at White Elk, searching his expression for some indication of his own feelings on the matter. His dark eyes met hers steadily, revealing nothing yet somehow conveying everything. "I need time to think," she said finally. Many horses nodded. "The soldiers return at midday. You have until then to decide your path." Rebecca left the lodge with her thoughts in turmoil. Marriage had never been part of her plans when she fled St. Louis. Even before that, as a headstrong young woman determined to forge her own way as a teacher, she had rejected several suitable matches arranged by her Philadelphia family. Yet this was different. This wasn't about social advancement or family connections. This was survival, hers, and in some ways the community's. A legitimate reason for her presence would protect not just her, but also those who had sheltered her. She walked to the creek's edge, finding a quiet spot to collect her thoughts. The water flowed clear and cold over smooth stones, unconcerned with human dilemmas. Rebecca watched its endless movement, seeking clarity in its simple persistence. A soft footfall alerted her to another's presence. Wichapi settled beside her, offering a cup of steaming tea. "Many horses have spoken to you," the older woman observed. Rebecca nodded, accepting the tea gratefully. "Did you know what he would propose?" I suspected, Wichapi replied. It is the logical solution. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Rebecca voiced her deepest concern. What if I marry someone and they come to resent me? An outsider forced upon them by circumstance. Wichapi's weathered face creased in a rare smile. I think you need not worry about that. What do you mean? My nephew is many things. A skilled hunter, a respected warrior, a keeper of old ways. But he is not skilled at hiding his heart from those who know him well. Wichapi's dark eyes sparkled with knowing amusement. He watches you when you teach the children. His voice changes when he speaks your name. Rebecca's cheeks warmed. A white elk has been kind to me, but kindness is the beginning, not the end, Wichapi interrupted gently. The rest grows with time, like spring grass after winter snows. Before Rebecca could respond, a horn sounded from the camp's edge, the signal that scouts had spotted the returning soldiers. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than expected. Rebecca rose quickly. I need to speak with White Elk before they arrive. Wichapi nodded approvingly. Go, follow your heart's knowing. She found him preparing with the other men to meet. The commissioners, adjusting the ceremonial feathers in his hair and checking that his appearance conveyed the proper dignity for negotiations. May I speak with you? Rebecca asked quietly. White Elk immediately stepped away from the others, leading her to a secluded spot behind his lodge. You have decided? He asked, his expression carefully neutral. I have questions first, Rebecca replied. This marriage, would it be real to you or merely an arrangement for protection? Something shifted in White Elk's stoic demeanor. When my people marry, it is for life, he said. I would not offer less to you. And is it you offering? Rebecca pressed, suddenly needing absolute clarity. Or just the council's solution? White Elk's gaze held hers steadily. I spoke for you in council when others doubted. I brought you to the sacred paintings that no outsider has seen. I taught you our ways when others would keep you at a distance. He paused, then added more softly, these were not the actions of a man fulfilling duty alone. The simple admission, unadorned with flowery declarations or grand promises, touched Rebecca more deeply than any romantic speech could have. In White Elk's straightforward honesty, she found her answer. Then yes, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I choose this path. I choose to stay among your people, with you. Relief and something warmer flickered in White Elk's dark eyes. He reached slowly for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. We will build a good life, he promised. Not without challenges, but never without respect. The horn sounded again, more urgently this time. White Elk reluctantly released her hand. I must go. The soldiers approach. What should I do? Rebecca asked. Stand with Wichapi and the women, he instructed. Show your choice clearly, but speak, only if directly addressed. Many horses will announce the marriage plans if necessary. When the army contingent arrived, they found the Lakota camp operating normally, women at their daily tasks, children playing under watchful eyes, men gathered, formally to receive the visitors. Rebecca stood with Wichapi, dressed fully in Lakota garments, her position among the women making her status clear to anyone with eyes to see. The commissioner's gaze passed over her initially, then snapped back in sudden recognition. You there, he called sharply. Step forward. Rebecca approached with measured dignity, conscious of the many eyes, both Lakota and white, watching her every move. What is your name, miss? The commissioner demanded. Rebecca, she replied simply, omitting her surname as White Elk had advised. What are you doing living among these people? The commissioner's tone carried clear disapproval. Many horses stepped forward before she could answer. She is to marry into our tribe, he announced, his aged voice carrying surprising strength. The ceremony takes place at the next full moon. The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably, clearly disliking this unexpected complication. "Miss, are you here of your own free will?" he asked, duty compelling the question despite his obvious desire to conclude this mission. Rebecca met his gaze directly. "I am exactly where I choose to be," she stated firmly. The commissioner sputtered with indignation, but the lieutenant placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We have no authority to interfere in a marital arrangement between consenting adults," he murmured, though loud enough for Rebecca to hear. "Our orders concern treaty violations only." Finding no evidence of the alleged raids and faced with a situation beyond their jurisdiction, the soldiers eventually departed. The commissioner promised darkly to report this irregular situation to proper authorities, but Rebecca knew such reports would likely be filed away and forgotten, one minor oddity in the vast Western territories. As the dust from the departing horses settled, White Elk moved to stand beside Rebecca. "They will not return soon," he observed. "The lieutenant has no taste for pointless missions." "And if they do return?" Rebecca asked. White Elk's hand found hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "Then we face them together, as family." The word, so simple yet profound, resonated through Rebecca. Family, something she had lost in Philadelphia and never found in her years of flight. Now, impossibly, she had found it among people who should have been strangers, but had become more than friends. That evening, the camp celebrated with a feast around the central fire. The bounty hunters were forgotten, Judge Blackwood's false. Accusations rendered meaningless in this new reality Rebecca had forged for herself. Her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her future. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Rebecca sat beside White Elk, watching the community gathered in celebration. Children played nearby, some practicing the English, words she had taught them. Wichapi demonstrated a beading technique to younger women. Many horses shared stories of the old days with attentive listeners. "Are you content with your choice?" White Elk asked quietly. Rebecca gazed at the scene before her. Not the life she had once imagined, but one rich with purpose and connection. "More than content," she replied. "I'm home." White Elk's hand found hers in the firelight, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. No further words were needed as they sat together, two people from different worlds who had found in each other not just safety or convenience, but the promise of a shared journey neither could have walked alone. The road ahead would hold challenges, cultural, differences to navigate, prejudices to overcome, the ever-present possibility that her past might someday catch up to her. But for now, with the prairie stretching endlessly around them, and the fire's warmth reflecting in the faces of her new family, Rebecca Morgan, teacher, fugitive, survivor, had finally stopped running. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
That's cool. It's on a Saturday too. That's surprising. Okay. Well, it's definitely more expensive now. I just fixed my tatting thing that I needed to fix. Hell yeah, way to go, May. You're welcome to add to the quest log if you need to. You need to track stuff. I was just talking about getting my personal training certification. You nearly rage quit. No, I'm sorry. Oh, that's frustrating to be in that spot. I get it though. All right, sounds good, Kame. Thanks for bringing your community over. Hope your voice And hopefully, overall, you feel better soon. Oh, you are too. I'm glad to have found you. Also, I need to make something. One sec. Welcome to the Pink Brigade. Love your face. Yeah, of course. Yeah, rest well. Hopefully.